Hello and welcome to the Indo-German Business Talk. My name is Matthias Catón. I am the Deputy Chairman and Executive Director of the Indo-German Center for Business Excellence, the institution that runs this format. And I'm also the moderator of this webinar. It's great to have you all here, all the viewers, and of course, our panelists. Today, we will talk about approaches to international security. Now, this may seem as a bit of a far-fetched topic for a format that is called the Business Talk, but as I hope we will find out in this webinar, of course, the question of international security has very, very direct implications on business and the functioning of business and trade as well. To discuss this topic, as usual, I am joined by an esteemed group of panelists. Today, there are three of them. I'll introduce them in a moment, and then we will get going with a hopefully interesting and interactive conversation. Also, as usual, as those of you who are regular viewers of this webinar know, we will bring in the audience, we'll bring in you, and we do that through the platform Slido. You should now be able to see a QR code. And to kick things off, while I introduce our panelists, we have a first question to you. And there you can just type in a word or several words that come to mind when you think about the question. And the question is, which topic should be at the top of the Indo-German collaborative security agenda? Interesting question, maybe also a broad question. Please go to slido.com now and start inputting your answers and your thoughts into that page. While you do that, I am going to introduce our panelists, and I'll start with Dr. Shanthie D'Souza. She is the founder and president of Mantraya, which is a research forum rooted in Goa, India. Dr. D'Souza has an impressive academic portfolio. She has collaborated with institutions such as the Kautilya School of Public Policy in Hyderabad and also the German Institute for International and Security Affairs in Berlin, which we'll get to again in a moment when I introduce another panelist. She's traveled extensively for her field of research and delved into security studies across South and Southeast Asia. She has authored significant publications, including a book that she has co-authored. The book is called Countering Insurgencies and Violence, Extremism in South and Southeast Asia. Welcome, Shanthie. We're glad to have you here today. Next is Ambika Vishwanath. She's the co-founder and director of the Kubernein initiative. I hope I pronounced that right. Otherwise, I'll give her the chance to correct me. Ambika has spent nearly 2 decades specializing in water security and conflict resolution, having worked on critical river basins such as the Nile and the Mekong. With a unique focus on blended foreign policy, water security, and diplomacy, Ambika has been at the forefront of efforts promoting inclusivity and gender mainstreaming in India's foreign policy. And her insights have found their ways into multiple outlets, including over 50 global and Indian publications. Welcome also to this webinar, Ambika. And finally, we have Dr. Christian Wagner. He is a senior fellow from the German Institute for International and Security Affairs in Berlin, also known in Germany by its acronym SWP. He has an extensive background in South Asian and Indo-Pacific studies, and he has held very esteemed positions, such as the head of the Research Division Asia at the Institute at SWP. He has also had the privilege of being a visiting fellow at several institutions, such as the Observer Research Foundation, very well-known think tank in India, of course, and notably, he has worked with Dr. D'Souza, so there are some connections here on this panel on a publication that is called Bolstering the India-Germany Strategic Partnership. So I hope the audience will immediately understand that we have a lot of collective wisdom on the topic of today's session. And I would like to begin with a question. Oh, sorry, I will get back to the, I almost forgot. We will get back to the question that we posed. So the question was, which topic should be at the top of the Indo-German collaborative security agenda? Now, you've still been a bit shy, I guess, so we don't have that many feedback mentions here, but we have a few. So one says fair and representative democracy promotion. Migration is another issue. Climate change, inclusive development, and fair trade. Okay, very interesting. And I invite the panel if they would like to also comment on that. But I would like to start with a very quick round, asking my panelists a broad and difficult question and giving them the task of giving a short answer. And that is, given the current geopolitical landscape, how would you define the term international security? What does that mean for you? And maybe we'll start with Christian.
Thank you. First, let me thank you and the Indo-German Center for Business Excellence for the kind invitation to be part of this panel with my esteemed colleagues from India. I think the definition is it's very, when it's short, it should be broad. So it's a mixture of, let's say, hard security conflicts like we see at the moment in Europe with the Ukraine war. But I think we also see a lot of what is called non-traditional security issues. And it's quite interesting that, that the audience has mentioned or has focused very much on the non-traditional security issues. And we should also not forget that the Ukraine war is not so much a topic in South Asia, in India, as it is in Europe. So in that sense, I think it's a broad term. It's, for us, it's more hard security at the moment. For my colleagues in India, it's probably also a little bit of hard security when it comes to China, but also non-traditional security. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. That was on point. That was short. So thank you for sticking to my request. Shanthie, if you hear Christian, is that in line with what your interpretation is, or do you have a different perspective also based on the geographic location that you're in?
I think I have the middle of the path approach, but before I get into that, I would like to thank you for having me on board and very interesting discussion. And the fact that we are talking about international security to a business group shows that how important security is. And thereby, I think I would take the middle of the path approach. And as it's good to connect with Christian again, but and we have worked on this topic. And I rightly understand that Europe has issues which is looking at hard security. But having said that, I think from where I am located now at South Asia, I'm not really in India, but in South Asia, is the human security approach that is, which combines and blends the traditional and the non-traditional security issues. So what happens is when you look at border issues or the conflicts like hot wars, which you're seeing now with the Russian Ukraine conflict, it's also those issues which exist in South Asia. But what we want to deal with is in looking at the human security approach, which looks at issues like climate change, migration, refugees, education, public health, and especially the pandemic, which has made us look at security in a very different perspective. So when we're talking about international security, we're just not looking at those hard issues. We're also looking at those soft issues, which will impact the hard security issues, and thereby compartmentalizing or differentiating these two becomes problematic. So I take an approach of having a human security view of things when you look at international security. That's broadly a brief answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shanthie. Ambika, what's your take? What is your definition of international security?
Yeah. Thank you, Matthias, and thank you also to the Indo-German Business Talk for having me. I have to echo what Shanthie said, that this is great that we're having this discussion to what might largely be a business community. So, and I think COVID, the Ukraine conflict, and other issues have made all our communities realize that they are so interconnected, right? So we can't do security without business and vice versa. They both made the answer pretty easy for me. And so what I would do is echo what they're saying and not repeat it, but add on that environmental security is, I think, a really important component of international security for me. And given that you know already that I have worked on water and climate for so many years, for blending human security with environment security and a little bit more of our traditional security concepts is how I would view international security today and then going forward, because you can't talk about security and peace of your countries without the human angle, of course, but also without the environmental angle. And so for me, that is an important component that needs to come together with also what Christian and Shanthie then mentioned.
Well, thank you to all three of you for this initial definition of the field. And Christian, I think initially said, maybe the perspective on what international security means is different depending on from where you're looking. Are you looking from Europe? Are you looking from South Asia? Are you looking from Latin America? Are you looking from Africa? But then I think the three of you also rightly pointed out that often the questions of hard traditional security and other forms of security, they're not clearly distinguishable. And one thing that came to mind is that obviously the Ukraine conflict is not just a very hard traditional war that is being fought, but it has also had repercussions for food security, for example, in very different parts of the world, through the restrictions and the difficulties of grain export from Ukraine, for example. So I guess that is one of the things that you alluded to. So Shanthie, maybe to you, when you look at security in Southeast Asia, how do you see the situation right now? And second question, what do you think, what role can both India and Germany play in that field?
Well, when you look at the security issues, I mean, for one, you have issues of terrorism and violent extremism, which is a very happening thing in the sense like the trends and analysis shows that it's a pattern that's not going to wish away. With what happened in Afghanistan, with the capture of power by the Taliban and the fact that international terrorist groups are operating in the region itself is a force multiplier for other groups to enhance their operations. So there is a serious threat of terrorism which exists. But beyond that, also, I think we are looking at issues which are in terms of, as pointed out, in terms of climate change, in terms of food security, in terms of public health. And these are issues which are really affecting the region. And what we're looking at is building those platforms of collaboration or regional cooperation, whereby we have a unified approach in South Asia and Southeast Asia. And that could be one way forward of looking at, how to build that collaboration. Now, if you ask me specifically between India and Germany, there has been tremendous potential for both these countries to look at both the issues, both the traditional and the non-traditional issues. When you look at the traditional security, I mean, there has been a gap in the sense like India could have done much more with Germany in terms of defense production and defense cooperation, and that is gradually building up. So the paper I had co-authored with Christian clearly points out to that. I mean, if you look at the areas where there has been a conversion of interest, it has been in the defense area, especially with Germany trying to, after the Ukraine conflict and the Zeitenwende, German foreign policy has seen some kind of change. It could be a dramatic change in the sense of looking at having better defense partners, and that is India is one of the reliable partners, because what India and Germany see in this region as a threat beyond terrorism and the flow of refugees from Afghanistan is also the rise of China and Indo-Pacific. And German foreign policy and policymakers have looked at the Indo-Pacific outlook, and they have the guidelines set out. And India is one of the important partners in that whole idea of the Indo-Pacific guidelines. And therefore, I think there's been a potential to develop that relationship, but the nuts and bolts of it are being worked out. For instance, there is a certain amount of talk of building the naval cooperation in terms of the submarines, but we need to expand it a bit more. And if you read the paper we had written, we were talking about areas where we could enhance that cooperation. So definitely, there's a lot of potential for India and Germany to work together on hard security issues, defense cooperation, more of interoperability, joint operations at certain level on Indo-Pacific, and also of areas where, which are newer and emerging challenges, be it in technology, in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of what's happening in terms of the migration and the climate change issues, which are really compelling people in the South Asia to look for new partners. And since India is on the rise, it's becoming an important pole in the emerging multipolar order. I think a cooperation with Germany at this point of time would be mutually win-win situation for both.
Christian, let me turn to you and to the German perspective. From your interpretation of things, has there been a a change when it comes to Germany's approach vis-a-vis India, the foreign policy aspect? Is there an increased willingness and ability to, for example, work together on defense issues? Is it still primarily a trade issue? What's the thinking in Berlin from the way you follow and shape the discussion over there?
Well, I think we have seen a tremendous change in the last 3 to 4 years. We should keep in mind that India and Germany have a very good relationship. For India, we are the most important partner within the EU. We have German companies who are operating in India for more than 50 years. We have about 30 dialogue formats between the two countries. So it's a very broad relationship, but so far mostly centered on trade and the business community. The change came with the Indo-Pacific guidelines in 2020, because at that point in time, the German government realized that the rise of China would affect the Indo-Pacific. The sea lanes of communication are important for Germany and the EU. So since that time, we may have, let's say, discovered India as a more geopolitical actor. Up to this point, we saw India mainly as a business partner, as a trading partner. Yes, we have a strategic partnership since 2000, but this was not really filled out in a proper form. Let's say we have intergovernmental consultations as well. So I would say the watershed moment are the Indo-Pacific guidelines, where India was identified as one of the key partners for Germany's Indo-Pacific policy. And since then, we have seen an enormous rise in the bilateral relationship. I think the Chancellor has met the Indian Prime Minister in his first year 3 to 4 times, which is unprecedented to previous heads of state. So in that sense, I think we have discovered India to be a very important partner in the future regional security order in the Indo-Pacific. And I think it's going to continue, that we will increase the relationship. Security is a very important factor, also a very difficult one, which also has to do with India's defense policy. I would like to add just one more point. India and Germany have also signed an agreement on triangular cooperation. So this could also imply that India and Germany would cooperate in a third country. So we can pool our resources for capacity building in Indian Ocean island states or other places. So I think that's also a very new instrument in the bilateral relationship. Thank you.
Thank you. Quick reminder, I saw my colleagues have posted something. Quick reminder to the audience, if you want to ask questions, and I hope you do have questions to our panelists, please go to our page on slido.com, use the 7-digit code, or just take a photo of the QR code that you should be able to see on your screens now. Good. Well, thank you very much, Christian, for this perspective from the German side. So there's clearly a shift in the perception of India, also the perception of the possibilities for cooperation. Now, when it comes to Indian foreign policy, Ambika, which is one of the areas that you're an expert in, of course, what's going on there? I mean, I recently was at a conference in India, in Mysore, very recently, and there, the foreign minister Jaishankar, he said something to the extent, and I hope I get the quote more or less right, is where he said, "Well, South Bloc, so the foreign office in Delhi, will be the voice or is the voice of the global South." So that's what he said, and that seems to be a little bit also the way in which Indian foreign policy is presenting itself. So do we see a kind of a resurgence of the non-aligned movement led by India? What's going on there? What is the motivation and the ambition of Indian foreign policy today?
Thank you. So 2 things, right? And a little bit to also react to what Christian and Shanthie said. I wouldn't say that there's a resurgence of the non-aligned movement, but more a realization from the Indian foreign policy side that one, We have our neighborhood first policy, which we are expanding in concentric circles. So it's our neighborhood, then the larger neighborhood that involves what is also now becoming increasingly important to Germany and other partners in Europe, which is, parts of the Indo-Pacific, and then the larger global community as well. For India, the global south, which is a term that I have very publicly also said that I don't necessarily agree with using at every stage. But for the Indian government right now, the global south is an important voice because for too long in too many different spaces, it has been missing, or it's been, I wouldn't, maybe not missing, but not necessarily as strong as it should have been. So you might have had some voices from the developing emerging economies in certain areas of global governance, but there needs to be much more of that. And so India sees itself as a very important sort of link between countries that are emerging, countries that are developing, having gone through a certain stage of our development journey ourselves, to other areas of global governance conversation, right? So the G20 has for so many years included the countries that are part of it, but it's still lacking in many ways. And so how can we ensure that the voices of other countries around the world can be brought into, say, the G20 conversation or other conversations as well? And so that's how we see ourselves a little bit, right? It's an important distinction from our non-aligned movement in the past, in that we are not saying that we are not aligned with anyone, but we are building new forms of partnerships, we are building new forms of relationships. And so Germany for India is a very important component of that new partnerships that we say. As Christian mentioned, Germany is not a new partner, but the way we see our partnership with Germany is definitely emerging. It's definitely new in that we're adding on more to that traditional aspect of trade and business. So the triangular cooperation, we're bringing in an angle of climate change, we're bringing in an angle of migration, we're bringing in an angle of humanitarian assistance, disaster risk and reduction. Some of this we're already doing in Africa under that triangular cooperation. And there are learnings from there that we can bring then into the Indo-Pacific region, whether we look at Southeast Asia or even the Pacific Island countries. All of this for India is a very important security strategic consideration. We don't see international security or security in the Indo-Pacific very purely from a hard security traditional lens. How do we view disaster management? How do we view economic cooperation, trade? How do we look at migration and what might emerge as potential migration stemming out of climate change, disasters related to that? All of that for India is very much part of our security conversation and security consideration. How does that connect to our military establishment, right? It's very new, it's very nascent, but we are already having this conversation. And so in that sense, Germany becomes, along with other partners around the world, becomes a very important aspect of that conversation. If we look at our discussions with Australia, for example, right now, with how we are engaging with Japan. Again, these are partnerships we've had for years and years and years, but we're adding on a lot more to it and bringing in the lens and the perspective of countries that may not be represented at these tables. And so for India, that then becomes a really important aspect as well, which is what you might have understood as well from what Minister Jaishankar had said in Mysore, but has been repeatedly saying both from his office, but others over the last several months as that we have held the G20 presidency. And I think we'll see a very strong representation of that in about 10 days time when the leaders meet happens as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Ambika. And maybe I can post a question from the audience, which seems to be a good follow-up to what you just said. And I'll read the question to you. And it says the following: India is a strong example of a diverse democracy and with internal conflicts, for example, in the Northeast and Kashmir. Shouldn't India focus more on its domestic security? What do you say to that question? Ambika.
I would say there was a question. I was in an event last week here in Delhi with some senior members of the Indian government and cabinet, and this was posed to them and about, with great power comes great responsibility. And I don't know if I would say India is yet a great power, but we definitely aspire to be one. And that brings a certain responsibility with it. Yes, of course, we have to focus on what's happening within India and our domestic context. That is also a security concern for us, right? What is happening in our border regions, given that our neighborhood is still a tenuous neighborhood. We don't have the safest of neighborhoods. So for us, all of this is important. But bringing our experience, our expertise on managing what can only be termed as, I think, a very complicated and still growing democracy, we have a lot to achieve, but we have also achieved quite a lot in many spaces. Bringing some of those experiences, those examples to countries that may benefit from it. And I don't mean that we are bringing democracy to everyone. That's not what India is doing, and that's not what India is interested in doing at all. But maybe some of our ideas, some of our learnings in spaces that might be useful for other countries. I think there's a value here, because in many cases, if it works in India, given the complicated nature that India is, it's possibly in some form or the other likely to work in other emerging economies as well.
Christian wanted to add, please.
Yes, it's not. I'm not adding to Ambika's points, because I would totally or mostly agree with her views. I would just go back to the previous point and would bring in a German perspective when we talked about security cooperation. We should keep in mind that Germany, in the security field, is a latecomer in the Indo-Pacific. So far, Germany has focused mostly on economics and trade. So we are a very important economic partner for most of the countries in the Indo-Pacific, from China to Southeast Asia or South Asia. But we have lacked over the years, let's say, the security dimension. So this is what is new, and it will be interesting to see in how far this will be a more permanent approach, because we have now the Ukraine war. The Ukraine war will put a lot of budget constraints. Also, we may see a rise in the defense expenditure, but I hope that we will continue also our security engagement with the Indo-Pacific. We have seen the Frigate Bayern, we have seen some German Air Force being in Australia. These are only small steps, yes, but they are very significant, and I hope we can continue this so that we will also underline the importance of the region and the importance of India as a strategic partner. Thank you.
But is that, let me ask you, I mean, as an expert, is that more, for example, the presence of the frigate that traveled through the Pacific a while ago, is that anything more than just a symbolic gesture? Would you say that Germany can really play an active role in shaping security in the Indo-Pacific? Or is that something that is way too far and way too big for a country of ours, especially given the still, even despite the recent discussion, still very big reluctancy also of the German public to invest heavily in things such as defense and the military?
Yes, I mean, you are right. Frigate Bayern was a symbolic step, but I found it quite interesting that we have seen the Air Force flying to Australia. We will also see in the years to come more military operations in this region. Of course, Germany is not the same, let's say, military player in this part of the world compared to France, but I think it's also important to signal to our partners in the region that we are supporting them, even if it's not military in the case of a military conflict, but also on other levels. And this is why I think these symbolic gestures are also very important in the broader picture. Thank you.
Understood. I would now like to move to the next question that we have prepared for our audience. So once again, please go to the Slido page that you can see here. And the next question is the following. Are Indo-German relations defined by hard power, by soft power, or is it a bit of both? So you don't have to write anything this time. You just need to press or select the option that you believe is most accurate. I would like to look a little bit at the business angle. And at the beginning, we've said that, you know, these things obviously have a lot of repercussions. From a business perspective, when we talk about India, at least in Germany, usually very soon you get to China. So you start talking about India, and very soon you get to China. So it's always kind of contrasted or compared to China. And of course, from the business perspective, the talk is about decoupling or de-risking. Again, vague terms. Nobody really knows what they mean, or everybody understands them slightly differently. Christian, is that really going on, or is that mostly political talk in Berlin? Is German economy really trying to de-risk and decouple and move business away, maybe from China towards, for example, India?
Well, I'm not an economist, so I do not have a lot of insight in this field. As far as I understood, many companies are trying to diversify their business relations. So this de-risking means, of course, that we continue to have good relations with China, but also looking for other partners or for new locations for production. Then, of course, India is always mentioned as a very potential country for investment, but India also then comes into a competition with other attractive locations in Southeast Asia, for instance. So in that sense, India is an important country. Yes, I mean, the market size is one of the most important factors. But when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to bureaucracy, which are important issues for the different companies, then the picture is not so rosy. So I think India has to do also a lot of reforms to improve the investment climate and to make German companies come more to India and not going to other places in Southeast Asia. Thank you.
Ambika, what is your take on this? Do you see increasing interest from German companies in India?
Yes. I mean, the short answer is yes. In the short time that the German China strategy was released, and with the caveat that, you know, I'm not an economist either, nor do we directly work on business relations, but I have spoken to several German businesses that have a long-standing presence in India, but German businesses that have had a long-standing presence in China that are now looking to India to understand what the Indian climate is, just as Christian said, right? What is the climate in terms of state capacity? What is the climate in terms of production? What is it in terms of red tape? You know, this is an issue in certain areas in India. There is also an image of India when it comes to corruption. Is that still an issue? Do we need to consider all of these things, right? And the number of questions that I have had in the last few weeks has been quite tremendous. So there is an interest for sure, but there's also a lack of understanding as to what do we do next. And I think that might be a little bit a gap in the China strategies, because the China strategy is telling German businesses, okay, we need to diversify, we need to de-risk. Now you figure out what to do next. And there's not a lot of clarity for these businesses, for these production houses, for these companies as to what that might actually look like. And so they're coming to India, of course, but they're also going to Vietnam. They're going to certain other Southeast Asian countries. There is also a realization that, sure, I can, maybe diversify from China and set up shop in India, but a lot of the smaller parts that I need to build, X product, whether it's in India, whether it's in Vietnam, we are still sourcing some of those little bits from China. So what does that mean then in your larger production? So these are questions that are emerging. And I think we need to think about, is India ready for this like huge influx? I would say yes and no. In some sectors, we are much more ready than we are in other sectors. And so I think we're likely to see that, like in automobiles, for example, our Make in India Mittelstand project that we've had with Germany for years now is looking, I think, is quite a bit ready. If we look at digital infrastructure, digital payments, some of that we are much more ready than some of the other sectors that might be coming to us. But it's an opportunity for India. I think we're looking at it as an opportunity. Are we ready to act on it really quickly and move fast? That I'm not so sure about yet.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's easier. Often these things are easier said than done. And you're right. I also recently read about that even India itself, which of course has had hostile relations with China for many decades, including military standoffs at the border. Even India is struggling apparently to decouple itself from the Chinese economy. So even on that level, that doesn't seem to be working. Shanthie, how do you see that? Is there maybe a kind of a mismatch between the macro level and the micro level? Because I often feel that on the political level, there's a lot of talk also in Germany about, the risks of being too dependent on one country. And I mean, we've seen this on a much smaller scale with Russia, and that has created tremendous conflicts or problems for the European and the German economy. Of course, the connections and the volume with China is much bigger. So on the macro level, there's a lot of talk. But when you drill down on the micro level of the individual company, for example, making investment decisions, making sourcing decisions, the thinking is quite different, and they may not see or may not care that much about the macro implications. Is that something that you also witness, Shanthie?
Yes, but I think I would differ a bit on this, because I think what happens at the micro level and affects the macro and vice versa. So you can't really disconnect the two. Like, what happened during the Russian-Ukraine conflict and the dependency Germany had on Russia. Likewise, India was dependent on Russia and still is for the energy reserves. So thereby, when you look at a conflict which breaks out in a way it does, and what are your options on your table, you have to look at a wide range of issues on the security and the strategic front. Now, coming to the business community, I mean, you can't be completely delinked with what happens on the international strategic sphere. So, for instance, if you look at the ease of doing business in India now, there's a lot many initiatives taken by like the Confederation of Indian Industry and other such confederations and business groups, which have not got the platform that is required. So if you're talking about, there are difficulties inside India, and as you have difficulties inside China. But the fact is that if any of the country becomes dependent on one country, like for instance, it's Russia or China, and thereby things go the other way, then what are your options on your table? What's your plan B? And how do you do your strategic planning and business planning associated with that? And when you do a planning, it has to be based on certain outcomes. So when a business company or a business group at a micro level, be it in India or Germany, is looking to working together, I mean, there are ways to reaching out and building on areas which are not being taken on. And for one, we know that there's lots happening on the science and technology front. But beyond that, you could also work on agriculture, you could work on greener technology, you could look at areas where you could help on health issues. And these are issues which have not got the necessary leverage in the business to business community talk. So my sense is that, beyond the strategic and the security aspects we're talking about, is also to build those collaborations and platforms between people to people, be it in terms of, agriculture or health or education. Education is a very important component as well. And look at areas where you can expand and work, and that platforms can be nicely built and you can have that connectivity. And when you do things at the micro level, you'll discover a lot of things about each other, and you know how to work with each other. And over time, you build that confidence that translates even into the strategic level. So you've built a critical mass that brings about the change you want to build into any relationship. And I think Matthias said the right point you pointed out about the dependency on China, and the German strategy of China is looking at diversification. You have to look at other partners seriously. I mean, India does have problems. It's not a perfect democracy. It's not a perfect business climate, but there's tremendous potential to do things in this country. It is a rising power. It has leverage. It has the economic clout, and now you also have the demographic component to it. So combined with this, look at the market, look at the labor, look at the skilled migrant labor, which is going to come to Germany from India. All that is going to transform the relationship at a very strategic and at a very micro level, which you're asking and talking about.
Ambika, you wanted to comment?
Yes, I mean, absolutely, 100% agree with what Shanthie is saying. And I just wanted to add here is that when we look at the micro, and I think that is one huge gap right now in the relationship between India and Germany, is the lack of understanding of just what is happening in India, right? And this is something that, and Christian will know this, any of us who have worked on Indo-German relations, is that we don't always understand what's happening in Germany and vice versa. But now when we are likely to see this, hopefully this large influx of business opportunity coming to India, that very basic question of, I'm bringing my plant and production house, I'm bringing my company. Do I go to Maharashtra? Do I go to Tamil Nadu? Do I go to Orissa, Gujarat? Where is it do I go? Where is the best opportunity for me? That understanding is definitely lacking, I would say. And it would be good on, yes, of course, the German side to be able to increase that awareness, but on the Indian side to be able to push that increase in awareness, right? Depending on what kind of company that you're bringing here, these are your list of opportunities. So understanding India beyond that surface level strategic, Berlin to Delhi connect, but more at the subnational diplomacy level as well. I think we need to improve on that for sure.
Can I just add in a bit to this, please? Because I think it's important that we talk of a micro level, and the lack of understanding, which I think Christian will really agree with, and Ambika's point alluding to, is also the fact of how the Indian foreign policy is made. There's a lot of centralization which occurs, So what the states really want to do with other countries do not get that kind of importance and that kind of leverage. And thereby there has been a shift, and there has been a rethinking in Indian foreign policy of decentralization, of devolution of foreign policy. And thereby a lot of thinking has gone in terms of having public policy options, public policy opinions into what areas and what new states can actually emerge as theaters for cooperation. So when you look at India, you don't look at it as a monolithic country. It's very diverse. There are different states which have different comparative advantage on the ground. How do you exploit that? How do you survey that? How do you build on that strength and then build that connect? And I think there are a couple of examples, and Christian can talk about it later. But from an economic and a business point of view, it's to get to the ground and understand what's happening at the micro level, reach out to people, build that connect, have that communication, and then build your strategy and work on it. And then I think it will turn into something substantial. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambika. Christian?
Yes, just let me add to to what has been said by my wonderful colleagues. I think we also have a huge lack of understanding on modern India in Germany. This is also an enormous problem. There is a debate in China studies about China competence. I fear not to open the chapter about India competence, because India competence is way below what we have on China competence when you look at university chairs and so on and so on. But there are also, and maybe this diversity which Ambika and Shanthie has highlighted, yes, you wonder whether that's an advantage for India or a disadvantage, because for China, the centralization has always been the big advantage also for the business community. You mostly go to Beijing or to Shanghai, you meet the local people from the party, and then you can do your investment, whereas Ambika and Shanthie have rightly pointed out, that's not the same in India. You have to go to the state capitals to look there for your partners. Then you have to go to somehow coordinate with the MEA in Delhi, and so on and so forth. But there are also good news, because we have seen, or we see also now, collaboration between the states in India and the Länder, which is the equivalent in Germany, between India and Germany. So Baden-Württemberg has a partnership with Maharashtra. Bavaria has it with Karnataka. And I think the state of North Rhine-Westphalia is also thinking to look for a state partner, so to say, in India. So I think this is also good news, and will certainly help to push by the micro level along the lines that Ambika and Shanthie have laid out. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We're already closely getting to the end of the webinar. I would like to go back to the question that we posed a while ago to our audience about the soft power and the hard power. And as you can see now, we do have a clear winner. So apparently, at least according to our audience, the Indo-German relations are defined by the joint use of soft power rather than hard power. At least that's what 2/3 of the people said. I would like to make one final concluding round among our panelists, and I would like to ask them, in the light of what we've discussed today, in the light of the current global situation, what is the one step in the realm of international security cooperation that you would wish Germany and India would undertake together? What would that be? Let's start with you, Shanthie.
Well, for me, it would be, I think, UN, the United Nations itself. I think that's an area where both countries can work on reform of UN to make it more expansion of the US, inclusion of other countries, and taking on issues which have not been dealt with. I think that is one platform where we see a lot of agreements and declarations being made, but I feel that India and Germany have not used their potential and clout enough to make a difference at the international level. Now, if you ask me on the regional level, I would say Afghanistan, because this was one country where India and Germany invested substantially, did a lot of good work, and had to leave for reasons because they didn't have a coordinated strategy. So if there was a triangular cooperation between India, Germany, and Afghanistan, maybe they could have continued the humanitarian work, continued the development options they were using, and also helped the people of Afghanistan. And largely, I think on the broader scale of Asia, I think it is the Indo-Pacific strategy where India and Germany can work together in building a substantial and a transformational relationship. So when we're looking at Indo-Pacific strategy of these countries, here in Bangladesh now, and I'm looking at their strategy again, it's very amorphous, it's very superfluous at some level. So we need to build certain teeth and certain substance into this kind of strategy, which looks at having a clearly defined role of what you're going to do in case of China going into hot war with Taiwan, China getting aggressive with the border in India, China becoming expansionist somewhere else, or a country which is going to change the international order in the years to come. So is India and Germany, which are important poles in the emerging multipolar order, going to take a more important role? I think they should. So they should start at a bilateral level, look at regional options of working together, providing that leadership and example. For example, what I'm talking about is triangular cooperation, could be Afghanistan, could be Africa, could be any of the island nations in the Pacific. I think that is where you can demonstrate that India and Germany can work together. And lastly, and importantly, at the international level, at the UN, bring in reform, bring in more of inclusion in the whole idea of United Nations, give teeth to that organization, and have a say on important issues, be it Ukraine, be it Afghanistan, or any other issues. And that's my idea. But the fact that, Matthias, you talked about, India taking on a role in the global south. And I think that's important because for long, India seems to have forgotten that role, which it did have during the non-alignment. And I'm glad that today India is taking up that role and pushing it forward. And so thereby, India is taking a huge portion of the population with it. And herein, I think Germany needs to work together with India on the developing countries and also on the developed, and having a framework of analysis of where do you pitch in your interest and how much of capacity do you have and what do you want that outcome to be. And that's broadly it. And last 1 minute of intervention is, I think this whole idea of India, which is very little understood in Germany, needs to be seriously probed and expanded. I was in Berlin for 6 months last year at SWP, and we realized that very few India hands, and Christian does such a tremendous job of it. But I mean, beyond that, you go to other places, you need to have more of India studies to understand India. You know China, but you really don't know how to do business with China. You don't know how to do business with India. But invest in visiting chairs, have more of India studies, and look at more of cooperation with Indian universities, academia, business groups. I think that will help bring about the transformation. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. And obviously, that's one of the things where our center tries to contribute in a modest way and help create that mutual understanding of India and Germany, and obviously also vice versa. Christian, what do you think?
Glad you're doing it. More power to you.
Of course. I would absolutely support that. Christian, what would your wish be? Which field of international security cooperation should India and Germany tackle jointly? What would you say?
If I take the slide from the audience where soft power was the winner, I think we have to focus on the soft power issues here. I would agree to what Shanthie said on the multilateral level, on the UN level. We are already cooperating in the group of 4 for reform of the United Nations system. I would have a slightly different view when I look at the region. We have seen in the Pacific a rise of minilateral forms of cooperation, very functional. So maybe Germany should also rethink its strategy, how to find partners for such a minilateral grouping, which could include India, Germany, Japan, and France. For instance, because Germany so far has invested very strongly in regional organizations, but most of regional organizations, except for ASEAN, have not been very successful. So I wonder in how far, let's say, focusing on these formats is still an instrument for the future, especially when it comes to soft security issues. Germany has an interest to support BIMSTEC, the regional organization in the Bay of Bengal, but let's say a more innovative step could also include to have a minilateral with India as a partner, and then a third or a fourth country as additional partners. Japan has excellent relations with India. We have excellent relations with Japan as well, so that's a natural partner. The same goes for France. I would also strongly highlight the triangular cooperation, because that's really an innovative instrument, which I think should be used much more. It will be a big challenge, yes, for both for all the bureaucracies involved, but I think it's worth trying, and I think this could make really an impact on many of the soft security issues, which have also in many cases a lot to do with issues of capacity building, yes, and training. So thank you.
Thank you, Christian. And then finally, we have Ambika. What would your wish be?
Yes, thank you. I think they've both laid out a lot of my wishes. So let me mention something a little bit different. I mean, geographically, I agree with pretty much everything that Christian and Shanthie had mentioned. So, and to Shanthie's point about, increasing the understanding, right? Since we're talking to the business community over here, maybe the German companies, maybe the Indian companies, they want to fund some of these chairs that the universities need, right? Both in India and in Germany. This is really important. So let me add on 2 other things here. One, I think, definitely the UNSC reform, global governance system reform for sure. But on the issue side of it, I would say climate change. And I said this right at the beginning, and your first question, climate change and migration were 2 issues that had come out in the from the answers from the audience, right? And I think both India and Germany look at climate change very similarly, but also very uniquely given the context of what we are facing in India and in Germany. And I think there's some great research happening, and there's a lot of collaboration potential on this, both for our respective countries, but it's something that we can take into then the triangular cooperation that Shanthie and Christian mentioned, into the four-way and minilateral cooperation, whether we're talking about it with Japan, whether we're talking about it with Australia, again, another important partner for India and a rising important partner for Germany, and then in other parts of the world as well. And this might seem a little odd to a lot of people, but I think the question of inclusivity and gender, Germany obviously places a lot of importance on that. And while India doesn't openly talk about it, if you look at some of the projects that India has in our development cooperation outside of India, our iTech program, gender is a very strong part of that. If we look at like education and other areas that we have brought to our partners in Africa or Southeast Asia. And so increasing that angle and that concept, I think, in whatever it is that we do as bilateral partners, but also whatever it is that we could do in our trilateral and then minilateral cooperation, whether it is climate change, whether it is trade, whether it is economic development. I think that gender and inclusive angle is something that we can do together very strongly. And so I would wish for more of that as well.
Great. Thank you very much. And by the way, we did not talk that much about gender today, but we did have a webinar session, I think back in February, where we specifically talked about gender issues in the Indo-German context. And if you're interested in that, I invite everyone to go to YouTube, to our YouTube channel, and you will find the recording there, as you will, by the way, also in some time, the recording of today's session. Good. We've come to the end. I would like to thank you all very, very much. Of course, first and foremost, my three panelists here for the wonderful discussion, but also to the audience for being an active part of this, contributing with questions and the votings. And of course, I should also not forget to thank my colleagues in the background who have been instrumental in preparing this session and running it here from the technical point of view. This is a monthly format, so we'll see each other hopefully next month, when we will address another topic pertinent to Indo-German business relations. Until then, thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthias.